The original PlayStation is a pretty kick-ass game console. I can't even really name a specific thing it's best known for. It had so much variety, so many great games that any one thing that I know it best for is not what someone else knows it best for. To some people, it was a CD player for your living room that would also play football games. To some people, it was the home to the most revolutionary RPG in history. To some people, it was the place for perfect arcade ports. I personally know it best as the place where a lot of incredible core home console experiences like Symphony of the Night, Armored Core, Resident Evil, Gran Turismo came to. However, before all that, in September of 1995, it wasn't anything to anyone because it had just come out. What was the PlayStation without generation defining Squaresoft RPGs, simulation racing, or Tony Hawk? What was the console on day one? This series is mostly going to be about software, so this first episode is going to be all about the hardware. And thankfully, that was all there on day one. Well, mostly. No DualShock yet. If we, if I wanted to say what the most anticipated things about the PlayStation were in 1995, I'd probably sum it up as 3D games, $2.99. It was a new console that could play 3D games really well, and it was really cheap. Sony wasn't an established video game maker with a big library of games that people could expect to play on it. Sony didn't have a history of home consoles that people could build expectations from. Sony did, however, have a great deal for third parties, which meant that anybody who wasn't Sega or Nintendo or Atari, and even Atari came over to PlayStation eventually, was going to be putting their games out on here so that they wouldn't be feeding their competition. Alongside its powerful 3D hardware, the PlayStation also came with a CD-ROM drive that it used as the default for game loading. Those two things really set up the hardware standard. Texture-mapped 3D graphics, FMV, and CD quality audio were its three party tricks. And those three party tricks defined a generation of video games. The PS1 also released with a controller that was familiar and easy to use, mimicking a Super Nintendo layout with non-Nintendo buttons and extra shoulder pads. It gave gamers a familiar baseline of control in games that had to control very differently from what last gen had. It gave people an easy entry point into games that were otherwise very hard to get your head wrapped around. All of that is the baseline. It's what I think you need to know before we actually discuss the games. It's the essential information that will define the way we look at games in the upcoming episodes of this series, focusing on the launch lineup of the PS1. A little bit about that series. Because all the games released on the same day, September 9th, I'm going to be reviewing them in their Japanese release order so that I will have a defined order to the games and be able to create a clean narrative out of the structure. There are 2 games that have the same release date in Japan and 3 games that only came out in the US initially. And for those games, I'll be reviewing them in alphabetical order to not give any personal bias to the order I reviewed the games in. The first game we're covering is Ridge Racer, a nearly perfect arcade port from the PS1's original launch in Japan, December 1994. See you then.